So if I'm speaking 100 miles an hour, you know why. And we've got maybe nearly half of our attendees now. I think I'll probably just do the introductions and get started and talk through the format today. We've got an hour. So welcome everyone who's joined. Thanks for being with us today. This is our first webinar of a series of 3 that you can see on screen. And it's really the reason we thought of putting this together was really that it was a topic that for us at Creative CX, we were having lots and lots of conversations with clients who were thinking about server-side, who had already started, who were just generally interested, had heard some buzz. And the common themes that it was like we're having the same conversations a few times over, and they were rarely about features and function of tools. They weren't really about technology. They were more about the topics that you can see on the screen, about the business case behind it. You know, why is it the right thing for a company to move towards? How you make the best of implementing it in the right way and enabling teams to use it, and then also how you integrate it into your business so that you make full value of it. And so today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk through the first topic of the business case or the use cases that drive it. We've got a few that we're going to talk through. The format for today is very kind of casual. We've got a few slides to support the conversation, but we've got a couple of guests who I'll introduce you to in a moment. Who are going to talk us through their experiences and help understand a little bit of what they've seen when they work through these. Today is conversational. We are recording it all, so if you've just joined or if you weren't able to attend, you wouldn't be hearing this obviously. But the recording will be available to everyone who's registered. Throughout the session, if you've got questions, we're going to save the questions till the end. Hopefully, we've put a bit of time aside at the end for a Q&A. I know Isabel has a hard stop near the end, but I think Stewart and I can hang around a bit as well if we run out of time. It is a big topic. There's a lot to get through, so we hope we'll do it justice in the hour. But please send through your questions. When we get near the end, we'll look through those questions and try and answer as many as we can. And I think that's the main bit for the introductions, really. The first thing I want to do is just talk about what server-side is. I'm not going to spend much time because I would imagine if you've joined this session, you already know what server-side is. But just to make sure we've covered this off, you know, the idea is that client-side testing is where you deliver your test variations in the client browser, and the change happens at that point, at the point of where the customer is. Server-side is just moving that experimentation to the server side of the exchange with the visitor. We're not going to go at that basic level. It's worth setting the scene, I think. But before we get into the main topics today, just a few introductions, really. And I'd actually like to start with some introductions from the audience. I'm not going to ask everyone to kind of say who they are and introduce their role and what they do. But as we were talking through these topics, as Stewart and Isabel and I were preparing for this week, we really struggled to think how best to position this because we felt that it really depends on what your background is. And I think that there's 3 questions here. On the right-hand side of your screen, you should find a polls function, or maybe if you open up the little dots, you should see a poll. I'm going to start adding the polls now, which is a few questions about what department you're from, what stage you're at in experimentation, and the last one, bear with me, and why are you here today? So just to give more context on that, typically, you know, A/B testing, CRO was the realm of marketing departments. More and more, this is becoming a variety of different teams, people from engineering, from IT, from product, and those different departments are different levels of maturity in terms of what it means for some of these features we're going to discuss. Similarly, companies who are just getting started with experimentation versus companies who are doing very complex things. And I think the why are you here today, that's really for us to help understand, you know, is this just because you're generally interested? Are you actively looking into server side? What we'll do is we'll keep those polls running, and we're just going to keep those to help form and structure how we answer questions as we go through the topics today. So that's the kind of the housekeeping out of the way, really. Thanks, I can see people are starting to fill it in already. I'm going to start with some intros to our speakers. So I'm Mark. You can see who I am, and I've already heard enough from me. I just wanted to introduce first, maybe Stewart, if you could do a quick introduction to yourself and your role. There you go, Stu.
Hi there, everyone. I'm Stewart Ehoff. I'm a software engineer specializing in experimentation at RS Components. I've been in the business for about 2 years, so I'm quite young in the experimentation world, but I spent a great deal of my career at RS really spearheading server-side initiatives and transforming our engineering and product outfits as well as the wider organization, to become more experimentation focused. So I'm really pleased to be here today, and hopefully I can share something that you find useful.
Great. Thanks, Stewart, and thanks for being here with us today. And Isabel, if you could do the same.
Of course. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Isabel Meijaard, a strategy consultant at Optimizely. So on a day-to-day basis, I help our clients with trying to build out experimentation practices. So how to govern it, set up the right processes and workflows, as well as help them with ideation, building out their roadmap, and basically anything on the strategic front of experimentation, both client-side experimentation, as well as server-side experimentation and feature management. So yeah, it's a little bit about.
Thanks, guys. So I think we'll dive straight into, so the main topics we're going to talk through today are a number of use cases that we discussed as the most common ones, the ones we hear most at Creative CX, but I think also ones that are relevant to both Stewart and Isabel. But before we get into it, I think there's a topic of the culture of experimentation, which anyone who's been anywhere near A/B testing, CRO, experimentation, will have heard this term bandied around a lot. There's obviously some big brands who talk about it very passionately, but I'd be interested to hear from both of you, maybe Isabel first. Why is it more important, or why is it relevant, particularly for server-side experimentation? What's important, and why is it even on this agenda today?
Yeah, so I think experimentation culture is definitely something that I work with my clients on a day-to-day basis, and something that is being brought up a lot with both our server-side clients as well as our client-side clients. But what is really important about trying to build out that culture and why server-side experimentation is such a big part of it is because it really will help create buy-in throughout the organization as you ingrain server-side experimentation throughout. So your product team, your engineering teams, and not just marketing will be involved in trying to build that out and trying to get visibility for what you're doing. So in terms of creating that culture of experimentation, changing mindsets there is extremely important, and trying to get into that culture of trying to test everything, testing to learn, not necessarily to win, and really to try and help objectify decision making in organizations. And if as an organization you're really trying to excel in the digital space, and you really want to make data-driven decisions and experimentation the core of your organization, server-side experimentation can really be help to be a really big part of it, as it truly ingrains within all those different teams and departments. Yeah. Great,
thanks, Isabel. And Stewart, I mean, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about your journey into server-side testing. So I know you said you've been in experimentation for a couple of years. Server-side tools are how long ago now that since you made the decision to move? It was or since you started using the tool?
This year, yes, we moved into server-side. Properly.
Mm-hmm. So yeah. Sorry, it's the same question really about culture and how that's been important for this process.
Yeah, I mean, Isabel's given me a really difficult job there because she's covered everything off really well. But I guess from where I'm coming from, typically what I've seen from other companies who might be running client-side programs and very much who may have been on a very similar journey that RS have been on, or might be earlier on in that journey. When you're running client-side experimentation, generally that doesn't tend to be across the entire organization. It might be just a specific team who is the owner of that client-side tool. It could sit in marketing, could sit in product. Sometimes client-side sits within engineering, but I've not seen that very often. And what that means is that actually the entire organization isn't necessarily abreast of the benefits that experimentation brings, but also the mindset that goes into experimentation, and actually being able to be truly experimental as an organization, opening up opportunities in all areas is really important, I find. And when we start to talk about server-side, and we talk about the concepts of empowering product and engineering teams to merge experimentation with the way that they fundamentally deliver products to their customers, you can't do that without actually having a conversation about the company culture, because that is fundamental in enabling that step in innovation.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And I think that's one of the reasons we talked about having that question in terms of who's, if I look at the polls early on as well, we already see there's a lot of product people on this call. And that's the interesting shift, I think, for anyone who's been in the world of experimentation for a while. Our traditional audience was marketing, and the fact that we're now talking to a range of different departments just really talks more to a company-wide culture than something at a sort of team level. So I think that theme will keep coming up throughout this. I think we've picked, as I said at the beginning, we picked 3 or 4 of the most common use cases we come across. I think the first one is probably, from my experience, is the one that we come across most often as the main reason someone even thinks about server-side testing. It's where people start to reach limits of what they can do from a complexity level with client-side testing, and want to be able to start doing things like changing pricing in the back end, changing the journey, more complex changes. Stuart, it would be good to hear your thoughts. And was this one of the use cases that was prime for RS when you made the move?
When we look at our journey, I think RS has run an experimentation program for a number of years, and that predominantly in the past was very much client-side focused. And when the program first began, and I think this is very true for when any experimentation program begins, there's a lot of easy wins. There's a lot of low-hanging fruits, a lot of really straightforward opportunities that you can use client-side experimentation for to improve the customer experience. Make these little tweaks, and really start to drive huge value. But as your program matures and as time goes on, you do start to find that the things that you want to experiment on inherently become more complex. And I would say in the previous year, my first year at RS, I really joined the organization when we were in the middle of that battle. We were getting ever increasing complexity in demand from what we'd be able to achieve with experimentation from our product owners. We wanted to explore deeper into our application, but just the mechanics of being able to do this was just too complex. The nature of client-side testing is you can only change what is delivered on the page after the web request. So really, I guess this technical limitation is what I could attribute us to starting us on our journey at looking at server-side RS components, and taking a lot of these use cases that we'd have from data that we'd seen from customers, from user research feedback, and from our product owners, really started to form the foundation of building a business case for server-side technology.
Okay, cool. And Isabel, I guess in your role at Optimizer, you come across a range of different clients, different verticals, etc. Is this a common use case that you come across with clients considering that change?
Yeah, most definitely. So in terms of what you mentioned around limitations of client-side testing and the fact that there's only so much you can do, it definitely is a part of why we see some of our clients build out business cases to start working with server-side experimentation. One thing that I wanted to add to what Stewart said about working with the low-hanging fruits initially, potentially for client-side testing, and then to continue with the more complex tests, is also that when we think about experimentation as a program within the organization and as an effort to really look at customer problems that you find in your user research and really try and solve for those and optimize for those, then also there's only so much you can do with client-side testing initially. If you really want to make sure that you are able to continue to address the problems that they are facing, that you find in either your data analytics, in your voice of customer research, then server-side testing just provides a lot more that you can work with, and will really allow you to continue to address these problems that keep evolving. So that is definitely something that I want to add here. That is something that we see that definitely there's a limit to what can be done, and a limit to the number of customer problems that can be fixed or solved for or tested with client-side experimentation.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's common for us as well. As I say, at Creative CX, we've been involved in rolling out server-side testing for a lot of clients. It is probably the most common use case. I think I'll probably repeat myself a bit today, that one of the things we want to highlight here is that going into any change like this with just one use case is not usually the best idea. Having a range of use cases and showing value in more than one way is usually indicative of success. The next one is one that, for me, being in digital for a number of years, it's an interesting transition, and this is maybe speaking more to audiences that are predominantly marketing. In my background in digital marketing, for years, the performance of the web page or the digital asset, the app or whatever, was always belonged to IT. And we were tinkering with the website and doing things to make it better, but we didn't really worry about page performance. Even though we all know, I think we've got some old stats here, Stats from 2008. So I think these are probably, imagine what the expectations of customers are now. But we all know the impact of poor performing web pages. But it seems to be more people's problems now. It's not just IT. I've had in the last year or so, I've had lots of marketing departments worry and concerned about how they're impacting performance. So Stuart, I think this is, I think, a use case that's come up for us with a few clients, and sometimes it's been the primary use case. Again, was it similar for guys at RS?
Functions aren't so necessarily too concerned about performance. I can't speak for today. You'd like to think that those things are changing, but it's just the nature of the beast, right? You are implementing a JavaScript solution that is loaded onto the page, which inherently will affect performance. So when we talk about client-side testing, I remember, Mike, you actually told me about a story about weighing up the benefits of an experimentation program versus the performance hit that you actually have by just having the snippet on your page.
Yep.
And I found that story to be really interesting because the reason is why is because looking at it in that way doesn't necessarily paint the whole picture. I like to see the performance hit that comes through from client-side testing as a tax that you have to pay in order to access experimentation. And organizations that are not doing experimentation, there's an opportunity cost there. There are opportunities that are being lost just by simply not looking into whether it's client-side or server-side experimentation technologies. Just not doing it I think has more of a cost than anything combined. But when you start to compare client-side versus server-side, you very quickly start to see that actually using a server-side technology, at least where SDKs are concerned and where optimizers are concerned, you can more or less eliminate performance hits as a result of running an experimentation program. So, previously we were using a client-side tagging solution. I couldn't quote you on any performance statistics there, but I know that, having baked Optimizely into all of our single-page applications within engineering, on average, making a decision server-side to run an experiment takes about 0.82 milliseconds, which is blindingly fast. I think it's difficult to even conceptualize just how fast that is. So you're absolutely right. Was this a big factor for us? Yes, absolutely. The RS engineering outfit is always continuing to mature. Performance is a huge, huge thing for us, and this was a big contributing factor to building our business case. Yeah,
and I think it's worth pointing out there that in stepping away from this topic of server side, server side is not a silver bullet solution for this impact on performance. I think it really highlights the importance of having an understanding of what the impact on performance is and having it as one of the factors in your prioritization framework. It's like you mentioned, the way you call it a tax, I think makes a lot of sense. It's like, we think we're going to get some value from doing this experiment or this personalization of the experience, but what is the cost? And one of the costs is the impact on page performance.
Yes, absolutely.
Isabel, I don't know if it's a common thing that comes across for you. I think when we talked about it the other day, you said it's not one you've had for your most recent clients. Is it a topic you have with some of those clients?
Yeah, so what mostly comes up around this topic is more that if I have clients working with client-side testing, that sometimes there are some complaints about flickering or even impacts on results from that flickering. So having potentially a snippet that is not implemented well, or having a lot of tests run at the same time, so having quite a heavy snippet there can really have an impact on how the page loads, and then while those tests are running, potentially also on the results that they generate. So because of that flicker that happened. So that's something that comes up occasionally, and that is something that obviously there's ways around it for client-side testing as well, right? So the ways the snippet is implemented and how it's loaded, synchronously or asynchronously, can really have a positive impact on that as well. But it is something that comes up and that can obviously be avoided if working with server-side experimentation.
Yeah, it's a bigger topic than just server-side, but I think, as I say, is one of the reasons, one of the primary use cases we see when clients are considering this change as a way to address that concern. I think one of the next use case we had was actually one that I didn't even have in my list, Stuart, and then you mentioned it, and once you mentioned it, it's so obvious, and maybe you can expand on on what we mean by pushing winners quicker, and tell us a bit more about the RS story.
I think this is a use case actually that was a huge contributing factor to the business case that we built for server-side technology. So when we talk about pushing winners quicker, we're just talking about when you've run an experiment and you get a statistically significant result and you want to then action that change. How long does it take you as an organization to actually get that out to the customers, right? For us as an organization, when operating in the client-side space, we would have experiment wins, and we'd for some of those, they'd be huge wins that had massive value for our customers and also for the business. When you're operating as a team who is not necessarily married up with product owners or engineering outfits, I can only speak for myself, but one of the challenges that we had was kind of being torn between two worlds, where we say, okay, this experiment has reached statistical significance. We now need to turn this into a committed change across our digital estate. So we have two options. The first is that we just leave the experiment running and we continue to reap the rewards, and we pay for that in our impression usage or whatever it is that however we build through our experimentation platform. There are some inherent negatives with that. Or we hand this over to a product and engineering team who can then build for that solution and get it into the website so we can reap the benefits. The big problem that we had was that I guess it's almost going beyond the topic of pushing winners quicker a little bit, but just zooming out into the way that we were structured as an organization. And it does come back to this cultural piece where we were kind of saying that despite getting these really strong wins and presenting these really strong results to product owners, as an organization, we weren't truly aligned with experimentation to be able to prioritize the wins that we had and actually get them out live to our customers. So oftentimes we'd be getting an experiment result and we were stuck between leaving it on or turning it off and losing the benefit. And it was this really tricky world where it's like, well, if we never turn it off, product and engineering are never going to want to build it because they can say, hey, well, look, we can see it on the site and we're getting the benefit. So I tend to coin this as leaving money on the table. You've got your experiment results. You need to turn them off because you're not incentivizing those to be built into the estate. And if you are just leaving them on, you're blocking yourself from running any further experiments and you're building technical debts in your client-side tool. So actually, what is the value of leaving that money on the table? What is the lost value? And actually building that into your business case is a really solid way to even before you start looking at other things like ROI or some of the other use cases we looked at, how much money are we losing in between experiment results and actually getting it live? Yeah,
and I think when we talked about this last week, and I think one of it comes back to the whole cultural thing. I think one of the inherent advantage of building through server-side is that you're building something that's closer to the end product, even if it's not the exact code that will go live on your site. Client-side testing at its core, when it first started out, was a way of hacking the experience, and you do whatever you need to make it look okay, but you weren't building scalable code. But the problem we have then is we're bringing in people who don't really aren't used to writing code that is going to be thrown away if it fails. Yes. It's a big change for people who aren't familiar with the concepts of experimentation. And I think we talked about this a little bit, Stuart. That was probably one of the challenges for you guys.
Yeah, it's another really good point that you make actually, and that actually with client-side testing, obviously we're working primarily with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, or even none of that. We might be using the WYSIWYG tools that we have available in our visual editors to change the experience as well. There might be no code available at all, but inherently, you're in running a client-side program, you have to do things twice almost. So you do the test, you get the result, and then you go back and you do it again to build it into your core application. With server-side technology, you are inherently the experiences that you're building is the production-ready code. So if you do get a winning result, you can just turn that on straight away. Yes, you have to go back and remove experiment artifacts from your code, but at least for us as an organization, that process takes 15 minutes to half an hour. And often actually our engineers are really excited when they get an experiment win. They're like, drop everything, get it live. It's great, you know.
Yeah.
So we've completely cut that out from our organization.
Great. Yeah, I don't know if Isabel, if you had anything to add to that one.
Yeah, so one thing from my side around the culture part that you just mentioned, Mark. So basically also by working with server-side experimentation, by having it more ingrained within the organization, having different departments or teams roles work with experimentation. Also from that get-go, there's more visibility, more awareness, and also that mindset shift will start to take place where people do realize how important continuous testing of these kinds of efforts is. So around the point that Stewart also mentioned with code potentially being written for simply test, and then if the test is not a winner, haven't been written for nothing. I think by having it starting to be ingrained within the org and creating that awareness and visibility throughout, I think that will become less and less of a challenge because people start to realize the benefit of working in a way like this. So that's just one of, another part to this specific discussion around pushing winners live quicker and the opportunity cost of leaving winners on the table. Yeah,
it's one I think, I at the beginning of our slides, we had a reference to Jeff Bezos, which I think every experimentation presentation has to have an Amazon reference, a booking. And I think there's some great stats from some of those leaders in the experimentation field in the Stefan Tomke book, the Experimentation Works book. When you hear the stats, I think I don't like to use those as references because it's not relevant to most businesses, right? Most of the businesses that are on the call today have different challenges to an Amazon or a Google or a Facebook, etc. But I think it's also sobering or helps sort of establish the understanding that what the reality of experimentation is. And when you see the amount of tests they go through and the percentage of those that are winners, it's quite astounding, really. If you consider them to be some of the most mature and sophisticated businesses in terms of experimentation. And I think you mentioned the stat. I've forgotten the stat now, but it's a very small percentage of their experiments actually go live to their customers in the end. And that's a really hard thing to grapple with, I think, for anyone, really, no matter what background you're from, because it feels like a lot of lost effort. But I think that's how they move their business forward. I think it's critical to what they do.
When you start to think about this, it can actually get a little bit scary because at least during the time that we were operating more as a centralized experimentation team, all the time that was going on and we were running our experiments, for every experiment we run, there must have been 10 times the amount of things that went out live to our customers without ever been experimented on. So you do start to wonder when you start to consider the opportunities involved in democratizing experimentation to everyone, embedding it into the heart of product and engineering via and enabling that through server-side technology. It can be a little bit scary to think about, actually, as an organization, how much are we putting out to our customers that we really have very little to or no idea around what the actual impact is. Yes, we might be able to do pre or post measurements and bits and pieces like that, but how well do we really understand that? And that can be quite frightening, I think.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, this is one that I hadn't had on my list when we first got together to discuss this session, and Stewart brought it up, and as soon as you mentioned it, it makes a huge amount of sense. I mean, in my experience, I've met many clients who have just got things running at 100% because they had no way of getting it live, and they were in a queue and a long, and what we've had to do in most of those cases is work to show the value to the rest of the business so we can get jumped up the queue. But you still are handing someone a concept that has to be built from scratch. So I think it deserves its place in sort of the top few use cases. I think that
something we've seen. It's happened rarely, but it has happened. In that, if you as an organization take actually so long to get a client-side test committed to live, you do start to wonder how valid your experiment results even were in the first place. How much has actually changed on your digital estate since you ran that experiment? Are the results even valid anymore? Is this even worth doing? Do we now need to run the experiment again because it took us 2 months, 3 months, and since then we've had a couple of rather major releases that might have changed the customer experience. So it just goes to show that actually, this cultural piece that we're talking about, this organizational wide alignment between product engineering and experimentation is so critical to absolutely nailing the customer experience. And I think, using experimentation as that binding agent between product and engineering, at least for RS Components, is paying dividends in the organization, both for the customer and for the business.
Yeah. I think the last use case we had, which I think touched on that slightly, is, and this is when looking at the polls, we've actually got a higher proportion of product people than marketing. So 7 people. So this is probably a topic that could be a whole webinar in itself. The concept of feature flags or feature toggles. It's probably not true of everyone, but generally speaking, it feels like the product world is slightly more advanced in thinking about how to do this. Probably been doing this maybe in different ways using different tools. I know it's a feature. I mean, if we had time today, I would have loved to show. Optimizely have got a great video demo of using the Flappy Bird game, which really helps us explain, the concept and how you use it. And I'd recommend anyone here who doesn't fully understand feature flags and toggles, go to the Optimizely site and find it. It's a great short 5-10 minute video that talks it through. But maybe Isabel, if you could talk a little bit about, what you've seen with clients using the Optimizely tools to enable this as a feature in the way they operate.
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of using feature flags, they can be used for a multitude of reasons within the platform. And in terms of what can be done, so let me give you guys a couple of examples around how I've seen them being used. So speaking of feature flags, and this image illustrates it quite well, is that you have that new feature, you either decide to toggle it on or off, and you decide to which audience you potentially want to roll it out to. Whether you want to roll it out in a staged way, so whether you wanted to roll it out in different stages and gradually, or whether you want to just flip the switch and give that experience to a specific subset of your users. So when we talk about feature flags, we generally talk about a couple of different ones. So we have, for instance, operational flags, permissions flags. So you may want to roll out features to specific users. You may want to give beta access to a subset of your users or a specific market. Like I mentioned, you may have stage rollout. So you may have a feature that may be quite a drastic change on your platform, and you may want to see, you want to mitigate risk by just rolling it out gradually and starting with exposing only 10% of your users. So these are all kinds of ways in which features can be managed and feature flags can be used on your platform. And there's many other ones like, feature tests as well. So you build your experiment as a feature test with different kinds of feature variables that you can change around and turn on and off, either by a PO or maybe someone from marketing if required. So all these different kind of things are use cases, could be use cases. And I think the opportunities here are endless. And by looking at it looking at experimentation and feature management in that broader perspective, you really allow your product and engineering teams to deliver products smarter, and to also be able to have product owners and marketing be able to just switch features on and off or roll it out to specific markets or target users if required. So it gives flexibility and a lot of additional opportunities to providing products to your end users.
Okay, great. Thanks, Isabel. And Stewart, for RS, is this a feature was it part of the use cases? Is it something you're using now?
Part of the use case when we were originally building out our business case for server-side experimentation. But we were introduced to the concepts of feature flagging via Optimizely. The feature flagging concepts use the same technologies that we use for experimentation. It's all baked into the same platform. It's really easy to access. And actually, as we started to explore what feature flagging could actually enable for the organization, we realized that by introducing experimentation and feature flagging in parallel, we were solving for a problem that the organization didn't even know that it had yet. So RS Components operates in, I believe it's over 36 markets. I couldn't quote on the exact figure, but over 36 is the term that we use. And that is one code base, one single code base that operates across all markets. Now, invariably, that introduces some challenges both within product and engineering. whether we've experimented on something and we want to get it out to our customers or not, or if we're just changing something in the code and we're doing a deployment or a release, the concepts around feature flagging actually enable you to get your releases and your products or features out to your customers in a much smarter way. Once you start to leverage the benefits of feature flagging, there's no way you could go back to doing it any other way. For us, the capabilities are incredibly strong when we consider the multiple markets we run in. So as an example, we could build a new feature for our product page. We could have tested that feature in various markets in EMEA. And we then want to think about, how do we actually get this to our customers? How do we preserve infrastructure? How do we do this in a safe way? There's no way we ever deploy code and that goes out to 100% of users in all markets, because that is just terrifying. So feature flags actually allows us to get those features to our customers in that safe and measured way. And if something goes wrong at 3 a.m, an engineer wakes up and they press the off button on the flag. You don't have to retire code. You don't have to do any rollbacks. It's an incredibly powerful and straightforward technology that really plays into Agile and DevOps. That's the way that we see it. But when we look through the lens of how this might contribute to a business case for server-side experimentation, if the vendor that you're looking at does have a feature flagging platform, which I should hope they do because the two technologies are incredibly complementary, you can really start to look at this through the lens of channeling this down the DevOps route, the product safety route, and that agility route.
Okay, great. Thanks. And then you mentioned earlier in terms of bringing engineering, was it engineering and product that came kind of, I think you mentioned service has been the glue between the two. Was this part of that, or was that the broader concept of experimentation?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, feature flagging does play a part in that, because at least where we're at, or where previously where we're coming from in RS Components, is that we had a separate release management team who would take all of our code, amalgamate different contributions from different teams, and do that in a single release, right? Invariably, that introduced, it doesn't play into the DevOps model, right? It doesn't play into the ownership of product model. The teams who actually build the products aren't quite in charge of the release, and the product owners aren't the people who are controlling those levers. So what feature flagging actually enables, both within product and engineering, is moving away from this dedicated release management team for us, where actually individual product and engineering teams could just release their products whenever they wanted. And that was completely enabled by feature flagging and the DevOps initiatives that we're running within the organization. I think for a product owner to have a dashboard of features that they've got running across all markets and being able to tune the sliders up or turn something off is incredibly powerful. And in our organization, that gets a lot of our product owners excited.
Yeah, great. I think just conscious of time, because I know we've got, I think I may have mentioned at the beginning that we'd picked some use cases today, because I think as anyone on the call might already know, there's more than 4 use cases. There's 4 we've talked through today. There's quite a lot of use cases you can discuss the server side. One of the reasons we thought it'd be good to talk about them is, as I said earlier, having just one use case to make any big technology change and change in the way you work is a very risky way of moving forwards. I think if you put a business case forward with one use case, you're really dependent on that being only one, and also it has to generate a return on investment. So I think the business case that is supported, or the business case that contains these use cases, I think, Stewart, when I first met you probably a year ago, you were just starting that research cycle, and you just got to the point where your current setup wasn't working for you, and you were, you obviously, from a technical perspective, it sounds cool and it's easy. I'm sure there are plenty of people, and might be people on this call today who have bought server side because it's a cool bit of technology, but it's really about how we understand the value that we're going to drive by making the change. Also understanding the cost. I think probably one of the core things that I may have mentioned at the beginning is that probably server side isn't right for absolutely every business, certainly not for right now for everyone, and we really would advise that everyone takes a bit of time to think through some of the use cases and explore more use cases and try and attribute some values and metrics to that. I think you mentioned a couple of use cases that were included in your business case. Was it the pushing winners quicker was one of them? Were there ones that we haven't mentioned today that played a part in how you convinced the business to make a change?
Yeah, I think there's one overarching theme that we've touched on in places, but I think is probably worth articulating when it comes to the business case. I think when I look back at the journey we've been on the sort of last year and a half, looking at where we were at as a client-side team, looking at some of the inefficiencies we had across the business and the opportunities that we had to drive value for both our customers and for the business through the adoption of server-side experimentation, I don't actually think we realized what we were getting ourselves into. Because when you start to look at these concepts, you very quickly realize that what you're talking about here isn't just bringing a vendor in and doing things the way that you did before. At least it wasn't that way for us. Actually, what we did is we threw all of our old practices and all of our old ways of working in the bin. And we put a business case together to fundamentally challenge the way that we think about products and the way that we deliver products to our customers, using data and putting the customer front and center around everything that we deliver. That was really the overarching theme of the business case. Some of the other topics we've spoken about here in terms of alignment with product and engineering, really demonstrable return on investment, getting winners out to customers quicker. In my view, those were all secondary compared to that overarching theme of embracing true experimentation as a huge and core component of our digital transformation journey.
So we said earlier, it's still relatively early in your journey, 5-6 months since you bought the tool or started implementing the tool. Are you under pressure still to focus on what the sort of the dollar impact is or the pound impact is on the business, or is it what's the window for you to prove the value, or is the change already demonstrable or the improvement?
It's already massively demonstrable. When we look at our product roadmaps a year ago compared to our product roadmaps today, and the way that both our product engineering and experimentation functions are all collaborating and working together, just the change in alignment there is already delivering huge value for us. We've already run a number of experiments that can demonstrate the longitudinal value of the experimentation program even already. When we were building our business case, we did some calculations based on our current velocity, and it was very clear that moving to a server-side program, embedding into engineering, increasing that acceleration, the ROI was going to be absolutely incredible, beyond anything you could ever imagine. So is the pressure on? Always. The pressure is always on to deliver. We've got such a packed, exciting agenda. We're on a really exciting digital transformation journey. Do I feel that we need to be reporting on every single pound and penny back to the business to convince the business that server-side experimentation is right? No, absolutely not. I believe that as an organization, we're at this point where we are really starting to embrace our culture of experimentation, and things like ROI modeling, using data and statistics to prove that value is like a cherry on the cake, if you will.
Okay.
It's a byproduct of a world-class digital experience and a successful experimentation program, not the end goal. And if you use ROI as your end goal, I think you might be looking at it through at least through a different lens than myself. Yeah.
It makes sense. I guess that at risk of overusing that culture thing, I think that there are some businesses I would imagine where ROI has to be front and center, and it's the easy measurable metric that we're going to prove the success of making a decision and continued investment in that decision. But at RS, you've got a reputation over the years for being quite bold and innovative in the way you guys work, and I think that obviously there was already some seeds of culture there that even if it stepped up a level, there was a good foundation to build it in. And Isabel, similar question for you. I know we picked a few use cases to go through today. Are there any other ones that you think we missed that really stand out for you that you think are worth a mention?
I think we covered most of what I typically see when working with my clients. I think we covered most of those off today. I think in general, and we've highlighted it numerous times throughout the webinar, but the fact that really looking at it from a digital transformation perspective, like Stewart has also said multiple times, is really important. And by looking at it that way, and potentially also obviously pulling in something around ROI and that actual monetary value that you may be able to, or that you will be able to generate with it, I think will be key. But trying to really focus on having server-side experimentation and building out that experimentation program properly as part of that digital transformation journey, I think is going to be really important to get that buy-in from leadership and budget holders for building out that business case. So I really do think that trying to focus around there and also maybe describing what not necessarily the monetary value is, but the value of that will be maybe on other facets to the business, just not necessarily the direct impact of specific tests for specific parts of the business, but looking at it more holistically and what other opportunities that change in mindset and that change maybe also in terms of structure may have in the future, I think could also be a really interesting angle to use as part of that business case. And then I think just in addition around maybe building a business case in a more general sense, is prior to getting started with it and prior to really trying to think about what the angle is that you want to use most predominantly throughout, I think it could be really important to try and understand from those key stakeholders that will be working with it and those key stakeholders that will be part of approving that business case, really what you expect the major bottlenecks to be in trying to get those stakeholders convinced and what really those key drivers and elements could be. So we mentioned a lot of them today, but really trying to get general sentiment and trying to see what angle you may want to use to really try and convince them, I think is just in general a very important thing to do. But that kind of goes hand in hand with what we discussed throughout the webinar today.
Yeah, I think, we've got a couple more webinars coming up. So next week, we're going to have some different people on the call talking through the technical implementation, the best practice about rolling it out and enabling it from a technical perspective. And then the third one is going to be looking at the execution part of it. And I think, although this to me is probably the most important, it's the starting point, and it's almost the most important consideration because it's the beginning of the journey. But it's also, I think, a few clients that I've met along the way who didn't really consider, okay, once we've got the tool, we bought this thing, we plugged it in, what do we do with it? And how does it coexist? And how do all the things that we've covered today, how do the teams talk to each other? What are the bottlenecks, to your point, Isabel? How does our governance model work? We had a roadmap and a strategy based on client-side testing, and now we've got a different tool that might sit in different hands. We're opening up to more people. So I think, I don't know, Stewart, for you, whether... do you think as a business consider those bits in advance well enough, or maybe if you did it all again, would you bring more of that forward, more of that consideration around roadmap and strategy? Or
I think we did, yes, but it's an ever evolving process. I think as we went through the business case and the process of procuring a solution, these were all things that we were thinking about. As I said before, we had to completely throw away all our old ways of working, all our old practices. We went from being a team that owned every single part of the experimentation process, from ideation to prioritization, all the way through to design, build, QA, analysis. We owned everything, and what we were saying is, actually, we're going to own nothing. The only thing that we're really going to be doing is providing the platform, providing the technology, evangelizing to the organization, building the knowledge, and sharing results and learnings throughout the organization to continue to build and evangelize that experimentation culture. I do think when you are looking at server side, as I said before, originally we didn't really know what we were looking at. Actually, yes, we said this solves some technology problems for us, but the lens is so much wider than that. And if I went back and did it all over again, would it be better? Of course it would, because I've learned so much, and the organization is always learning and evolving all the time as well. But to even just to look to where we are now to where we were a year ago, through the vessel of server-side experimentation, the conversations it's opened up to the organization, and the way it's driving cultural change to enable our digital transformation, it's fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
Great, good to hear. I'm glad you're still learning as well. I guess we all are. It's good to acknowledge that we're all learning as we go through these things. I think that we've covered off kind of the key topics we wanted to cover. We've got a couple of questions that came through. I just wanted to send out one more poll to the audience, if they'd indulge me. I'd be interested to hear. We'd love a bit of feedback. We'll probably send out a proper feedback form following this session. But just if you've got time now, just of the use cases that we went through, the 4 use cases, I'd be interested to hear, which ones are the most relevant to your current situation. So we talked through deeper or more complex experimentation, the performance of the assets, the page, whatever you want to call it, getting those winners quicker, live quicker, however you phrase that, and feature flags. So it'd be great to hear that. And I think at this point, we're probably going to move on. We put a little bit of time aside at the end to answer a few questions. I can see we've got 1 or 2 that's come through already. I don't know, Stu and Isabel, if you can see those questions that have come through. I don't know if we want volunteers, or should I put you under pressure and pick one of them? Maybe if we look at that first question there about the advantages of server-side testing over redirect testing. Isabel, maybe if I kind of put you in the spotlight for that one.
For sure. So I think it's a really good question. I think in terms of what we discussed around server-side testing today, it has been more around the opportunities that it brings to your entire digital transformation journey, really. So really looking at it from what does it mean for your organization and how you will be able to grow in working in a data-driven way, how you will be able to objectify decision-making, how you will be able to really have experimentation and learning about your user and its experience along the way, how you can make that front and center. So I would say advantages of server-side testing over redirect testing in itself. So if we just look at a redirect test versus server-side test in isolation and not look at what server-side testing versus client-side testing can bring on a larger scale, I think there can be instances where a redirect test may work somewhat as well as a server-side test could. If you, for instance, redesign a specific, let's say a landing page, you might be able to do that with a somewhat simpler setup of a redirect test rather than having to work with server-side testing for that one. So I think in general, looking at that, it might work both ways. But when we look at server-side testing as a whole and how it involves and ingrains more within your organization and addresses different disciplines, I think on that end, it is probably a lot more valuable on that grander scale. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, well, I think so, and I think at the end of this, if there's more that people, I think I'll share our contact details at the end if people want to get deeper into it. I think I'd share, what you said there. I think, the one thing for me, although server-side has been around for a long time, it seems to be more of a hot topic at the moment for us at Creative CX. We're talking about it and doing it for a lot more clients in the last 12 to 18 months. But it's not a silver bullet, as I said before. It's not right for everyone. It doesn't solve every problem. It is an additional tool in the set, and I think understanding what the right approach is for the specific requirements make a lot of sense, which is quite a general statement. I guess it's true of most technology. So I don't know if you want to add more to that, or if you want to. There's another question we've got through from Rob around QAing server-side tests.
Feel free to put them into the chat. While you guys are thinking about that, I guess I'm probably coming from this from a different angle, because what we're trying to preach, I guess, with server-side testing is actually moving away from deploying larger and more complex features, and actually trying to break down complex problems with simple solutions that we can deliver quickly for our customers, and understand if in doing so, we're moving in the right direction. Are we solving for a particular customer problem? Are we, and if so, is that demonstratable through the statistics that we're getting back through the experiment? As an organization, historically, we've tended to work in big, chunky pieces of work, right? We're delivering big things, big features, and it's not very agile. It's not very DevOps. And it's certainly not very experimental as far as I'm concerned. So I guess at least at RS Components, we're trying to move away from building those bigger things. We've been burnt a couple of times by building big solutions, running those as experiments, getting back a set of data or results that we just can't introspect or understand because we've changed so much through the experience. That's not necessarily to say that there's not a point in time where, as an organization, you feel that the experience you've delivered has run out of optimization or experimentation opportunities, and actually you need to revolutionize, not evolutionize. Yeah, I think when I look at that complex experimentation, my immediate reaction is always to try and break it down and be as simple as we can.
Okay, thanks, Stu. And the other question we got through from Rob there around QAing server-side tests. I mean, to either of you really, any complications? Does it make it a different task to QA a server-side test?
Actually, as well. QAing server-side tests. I mean, when you're comparing, I guess, QAing server-side versus client-side tests, what you're talking about here is you're talking about a marketing or a product team who owns experimentation QAing the change that they've made through the client-side tool or through some HTML, CSS, and JS code that they've written, versus the invariably more stringent QA process that you'll have and find within engineering. So at RS Components, we've got automation pipelines that do end user testing and bits and pieces like that that do all of that QAing for us in a really automated and clever way. So I think around the concept of server-side experimentation QA, what you're actually saying is generally what are the QA processes in your organization? Because with server-side testing, it's these experiments are delivered by engineering, by the people who own the product. So at least for us, it's been a simplification process, and actually now more than ever, we're far more confident in the quality of the experiments we're releasing because they come from engineering and they come through those strict deployment processes with automation and validation checks and stubs.
Yeah, good answer. Thanks. I'm conscious of time. I think Stu, you said you could hang around for a bit if you have a few more questions. Isabel, you've got to run off in a few minutes. So just before, we've got a great question through from Josh, so I'll do that one next. But just before we do, just to let everyone who's still on the call know, all three of us are really happy to kind of carry on the conversation. I think it's hard to get these topics covered in an hour, and there's a lot more to it, and it's different for everyone. So any of us is available. Some contact details there on the screen if you want to reach out, and we can carry on the conversation or help answer any of your specific questions. Isabel, do you want to have a quick crack at this question from Josh, or have you got to run?
That's all right. I can have a quick go at it. So I'm trying to read this real quick. Difficult to shift people's perceptions around the speed of delivery of a client-side test to potentially a long delivery in a server side. So if I understand correctly, what you're asking specifically is around how fast you could potentially deliver a client-side test, so maybe something that you build swiftly in the WYSIWYG that you have up and running and that you turn on, and then versus a server-side test that it's part of maybe sprint or release cycle and working through that, and then you get that live. So to shift people's perceptions around that, I think in general the idea, let me actually have a think about whether it's difficult to shift perception there. I think it does not, because once you start testing server side and once you start having engineering teams and product teams on board and ready to test in that slightly different way, I think that comes with the perception that those tests will take more longer to potentially deliver, and it won't be as easy to just simply roll something out. And it is part of that flow of that product development lifecycle of that backlog that you have in place. So I think by having these means in place to also plan that out and create visibility on that, I think that will really help in not having potentially issues with perceptions on the speed of delivery there. Yeah. And I think it is also to be expected on that front. So I haven't really seen any issues there. Maybe Stewart, I'm not sure if you have seen something similar.
I think actually quite the opposite. For us as an organization, one of the biggest challenges when we started talking about server-side was actually particularly from the product owners. It's kind of saying, well, how do we weave experimentation into our very large existing technical delivery backlog? And actually, these server-side experiments, they inherently, you're right, they may take longer than just quickly building up a client-side test in the WYSIWYG editor. So when I was having these conversations with product owners across the business about weaving experimentation into the product development process and time within product and engineering to deliver that, the original perception was still of, I guess, what you can consider to be the client-side world, where product owners were thinking, okay, well, maybe spend 10 or 15% of time within a sprint on experimentation. And I was kind of like, okay, hang on a minute, actually. So what you're proposing then is that we spend 10, 15% of our time doing experiments, proving features that work for customers, and then 80 or 85% of our time not doing that. And when you frame the conversation in that way, the product owners actually go, hang on a minute. You arrive at this epiphany that everything that you do needs to be an experiment. And actually, it doesn't matter how fast you deliver those features. It just matters that when you do deliver that feature to customers, that you've actually made a positive impact. You might be able to get those results very quickly with client-side testing, but then you're limited by the technology. So you have to go to engineering. You have to buy the time within engineering. But then they say, okay, well, we can't because we've got this technical backlog. Then, you, as I said, you enter into this challenging conversation around fundamentally changing the way that you as an organization build and deliver products. So at least in my experiences, that's how we got them on board. But it's a great question. It's definitely been a challenge for us.
Yeah. And I think just so you know, Isabel had to drop off, Stu. It wasn't she didn't like your answer. She had another meeting.
No, we knew she had a hard stop. So that's okay.
Yeah. So I think the only thing I would add to that is from my side, I think it's also the idea that this isn't a big bang. You don't buy a server side and that replaces everything, and there's only one way of doing things going forwards. And I think this is true of most technology changes. Is a lot of that is to do about setting expectations correctly and sort of internal PR of how you manage expectations of different stakeholders in the business. So I think I probably mentioned it earlier around governance models. One of the first times we really started having the same question again from clients was, how do we, do we run it alongside our client-side testing and our server-side testing, and how do we make sure that we don't bump into each other on the testing roadmap? But I think that's a part of it as well. Is that although once you've got that new toy, you want to just kind of go full throttle and start rolling out tests. I think it's a matter of having multiple streams working to make sure that the program as a whole is delivering value and is seen to be delivering value. But it's almost as if your quicker, less complex client-side tests are just buying you time to get those more sophisticated server-side tests out the door. And I think it's almost an orchestra that you have to manage of the different parts that all head in the same sort of direction.
I think a common misconception is that when we're saying we're delivering server-side experiments, that we're delivering production-ready code. I think there's a misconception that actually what we need to deliver to the customer is the final and finished feature, and that's generally not always the case. What you're actually trying to do with server-side experimentation is break down the development process, break down the way that we think about building products, and actually say, okay, well, instead of building a big complex feature, let's make it as simple as possible. Let's build the smallest thing we can with the least amount of engineering resource that we possibly can, time boxing that to prove a hypothesis or not. Because in that way, you're then able to hedge lots of small bets rather than one very big bet. So, the big mindset shift there, really, that we're talking about, and you've mentioned it, Mark, is actually is saying that break down these problems and have simpler solutions for our problems, and deliver those more rapidly and more iteratively.
Yeah, agreed. I think you mentioned that a similar thing earlier when we go through it. I think it's a great point and a great question. Thanks, Josh. I think we don't have any more questions coming through at the moment, so we must have done a great job of summarising all the topics. I know also we're over time, so I'm sure people are busy and have had to go off to other things. So I think, unless there's anything else to add, just a quick, Isabel's gone, but I'll send her my thanks separately. Stuart, really appreciate you coming on the call. Really, the journey you've had at RS has been really, really fascinating. And I think, when we first spoke about this, I thought, well, we could just sit back and hear your story because I think it's relevant to lots of people on the call. But I really appreciate you taking the time, and thanks for coming. And everyone who's been listening in, and the questions and the polls that have been answered, thanks so much for your time. There'll be a recording available. And there's also, to say, next week we'll have another webinar where we'll be talking about the technical implementation, best practice around that. And then in 2 weeks' time, we'll be talking more about the execution and how you enable the capability in the business. So if you or one of your colleagues is available to join that, I'd really encourage you to do so. Thanks for your time. And well, enjoy and good luck with server-side testing if you go down that path. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.